For 10 years, he wandered the streets of Seoul, pretending to be a drunk, a fool, a nobody. He borrowed money he couldn't repay. He begged food from merchants. He traded poems with commoners and painted in courtyard alleys. The nobles at court laughed at him. They called him a useless member of the royal family. Educated enough to be annoying, too harmless to bother removing. Then his son was made King of Korea, and every single person who had laughed at him spent the next decade wishing they hadn't. His name was Yi Ha-eung. History knows him as Heungseon Daewongun. The Grand Prince who pretended to be powerless for 10 years so he could become the most powerful man in Korea. He dismantled a century-old political machine in less time than it had taken him to pretend he didn't exist. He rebuilt a palace. He taxed the untaxable. He turned away Western gunships. Then his son took his power away, and the woman who replaced him was murdered by Japan. This is a story about what happens when the fool turns out to have been watching all along. To understand what Yi Ha-eung was doing during those 10 years of pretense, you have to understand what he was hiding from. By the mid-19th century, the Joseon dynasty was 450 years old and nearly hollow. The kings still sat on the throne, but the court was controlled by a single family clan, the Andong Kim, Andong Gimsi. Their method was elegant and ruthless. They selected queens. For generations, the Andong Kim had placed their daughters as royal consorts, then as queens. A young king arrives. He comes with no political base of his own, but his queen's family, the Andong Kim. They have ministers, governors, generals. They have money and records and appointments going back 4 reigns. The king was told what to know. He governed what he was allowed to govern. The real machinery turned elsewhere. Any member of the Joseon royal family who showed ambition was a threat. Threats were removed. Yi Ha-eung was royal by blood, a distant cousin of the line. He was educated, intelligent, and perceptive. These qualities in that era could get a man killed. So he made a calculation. He could not fight the Andong Kim. Not yet. He could not build alliances openly. He could not accumulate resources visibly. Everything visible was dangerous. The only safe thing to be, in a court that destroyed the ambitious, was to appear to have no ambitions at all. He spent the 1850s performing degradation with extraordinary discipline. He borrowed money from merchants and failed to repay it, deliberately. He ate with commoners at street stalls. He drank in low establishments with poets, monks, and craftsmen who had no place at court. He wrote calligraphy for orchids, a traditional art of the Joseon literati, and sold the paintings for small sums. He let himself be seen as a curiosity, a royal cousin too far from the succession to matter, too dissolute to be worth watching. The Andong Kim stopped watching him. That was the point. But while he performed, he was learning. He studied the Confucian academies, the Seoul, and how they had become extraction machines rather than centers of learning. He studied the taxation system that exempted nobles while crushing peasants and merchants. He built relationships with Queen Dowager Sinjong, Jodebi, a woman from the rival Pungyangjo clan, not the Andong Kim, who had her own grievances against the dominant family. He made himself useful to her in small, invisible ways. He also had a son, Yi Myung-bok, born 1852. Yi Ha-eung raised the boy quietly, waiting. When King Cheoljong, the reigning monarch, fell ill in 1863 with no male heir. The question of succession became urgent. The Andong Kim needed a new king they could control. A child was ideal. Yi Ha-eung's 11-year-old son was royal by blood, young, and his father was, by all appearances, a harmless drunk. The perfect candidate. Controllable, they thought, through both his age and his father's uselessness. Queen Dowager Sinjong, who outranked the Andong Kim women in the succession question, selected Yi Myung-bok as the new king. The Andong Kim agreed. They had no reason not to. Yi Ha-eung stood in court as the father of the new king, the man they had laughed at for 10 years. Every person in that room had underestimated him. None of them understood yet what they had done. As the king's father, Yi Ha-eung received the title Heungseon Daewongun and became regent. He moved with a speed that stunned a court that had assumed his decade of idleness was real. The Andong Kim were the first target. Their appointments, their allies, their network of court positions. The Daewongun replaced them systematically, installing officials based on merit and regional balance rather than clan connections. It was not revenge in any personal sense. It was structural. He was removing a mechanism that had run the country for a century. Then he attacked the economic machine underneath. Joseon's taxation system was broken. Yangban, the scholar noble class, had been largely exempt from military taxation. The burden fell on commoners and merchants. Yi Ha-eung reformed this, imposing the household cloth tax, hopoje, on Yangban households as well. The noble class was furious. He did not stop. The Seowon were next. There were roughly 650 of these private Confucian academies across the country. Originally, they had served as centers of learning and local culture. By the 1860s, most were functioning as tax-exempt estates, accumulating land, avoiding military service requirements, exploiting local populations, and serving as political bases for the families that controlled them. The Daewongun closed all but 47, preserving only those with genuine historical and cultural significance. The Confucian scholars who ran these academies were outraged. They sent petition after petition to court. The Daewongun received the petitions, noted that each one came from a man who had benefited personally from a tax-exempt academy, and ignored them. He was building a functional state out of the ruins of a captured one. Gyeongbokgung, the Palace of Shining Happiness, had been the seat of Joseon power since 1395. When Japanese forces invaded in 1592, during the Imjin War, the palace burned. The kings of Joseon retreated to smaller palaces across Seoul. For 273 years, Gyeongbokgung stood as a ruin and a symbol of what Joseon had been and of what it had lost. The Daewongun ordered its reconstruction in 1865. This was not merely a vanity project. A regent needed a symbol of state power. A king required a palace appropriate to his station. Joseon needed to look like what it claimed to be. The cost was immense. The project required forced labor and extraordinary taxes. Special coins were issued that devalued existing currency. Merchants and ordinary citizens bore the economic weight. The palace was largely complete by 1868, magnificent, functioning, a genuine restoration of the Joseon capital's symbolic center. The economic damage it caused was real and lasting. At the same time, the Daewongun was rebuilding the palace. Foreign ships were beginning to appear off Korea's coasts with increasing frequency. His response was absolute. Korea was not open. In 1866, French missionaries who had been operating clandestinely in Korea were arrested and executed, along with thousands of Korean Catholics. France sent a punitive expedition of 7 warships and 600 marines to the island of Ganghwa. The Daewongun's forces fought them to a draw. The French withdrew after failing to secure meaningful concessions. That same year, an American merchant vessel, the General Sherman, sailed up the Taedong River toward Pyongyang and was destroyed by Korean forces. In 1871, the United States sent a naval expedition of 5 warships to open Korea. Korean forces resisted. After capturing several forts on Ganghwa Island, the Americans eventually withdrew without achieving their diplomatic objectives. The Daewongun took this as vindication. He erected carved stone pillars throughout the country, bearing the message, "Western barbarians invade. If we do not fight, we must make peace. Advocating peace is betraying the nation." These were the Chukwabi, the monuments to exclusion. He had repelled the French and the Americans. He believed isolation was working. He did not understand, could not yet see, that the world had changed in ways that made isolation fatal rather than protective. In 1873, King Cheoljong turned 21 and declared that he was now ruling personally. The regency was over. The Daewongun retired from political power. He was 62 years old, in good health, and absolutely unwilling to remain retired. The force that had organized Cheoljong's declaration was not the king himself. It was Queen Min, Myeongsong, later known as Empress Myeongsong, the woman Cheoljong had married in 1866. Yi Ha-eung had selected her himself, choosing an orphan girl from a minor family, specifically because she had no powerful clan behind her. He had intended her to be manageable. She was not manageable. Queen Min was intelligent, politically astute, and understood that the Daewongun's power depended on controlling her husband. She built her own alliances. With Confucian scholars who hated the Seowon closures, with Yang Ban who resented the household tax, with foreign policy pragmatists who believed isolation was destroying Joseon's future. She outmaneuvered the man who had spent 10 years outmaneuvering everyone else. What followed was 25 years of the most intense political conflict in Korean history. The Daewongun attempted to return to power repeatedly. In 1882, a military mutiny by soldiers who hadn't been paid, the Imo incident, briefly brought him back to the court before Chinese intervention removed him. He was detained in China for 3 years. He returned. He was marginalized again. He intrigued with Japanese agents, even as he hated Japan. He backed the wrong sides at crucial moments. He remained dangerous and was always treated as such. Queen Min was assassinated in October 1895. Japanese agents and Korean soldiers broke into Gyeongbokgung, the palace the Daewongun had rebuilt, murdered her, and burned her body in the palace grounds. The Daewongun was implicated in at least knowing about the plot, though the extent of his involvement remains disputed. Yi Ha-eung, Heungseon Daewongun, died in 1898 at the age of 78. His son Cheoljong had outlived the Joseon dynasty itself. He would become the first emperor of the Korean Empire in 1897, and watch that empire be annexed by Japan in 1910, 12 years after his father's death. The Daewongun had spent 10 years pretending to be powerless to avoid being destroyed by a political machine. He spent the next 10 years dismantling that machine with extraordinary skill. Then he spent 25 years watching his son's reign, consumed by the forces he had tried to hold at the border. Foreign powers that grew stronger every year that Korea stayed closed. The man who pretended to be a fool was never a fool. Whether his choices were wise is a different question, and one that Korea is still answering.